Meg thought he could almost see through her. Then she smiled and her scent seemed to wrap themselves around him in like a huge weight of his shoulders, as if he had been carting his gear in a backpack. Max suddenly felt lighter than air, almost as if he were no longer touching the ground. She was hugging him without hugging him, or really without even touching him. Only when she pulled back, which was probably just seconds later, did he realize that he was still standing on his bed and that his feet were still touching the deck. "Oh, don't mind her," the big black woman laughed. "She has the effect on everyone." "I like it," he muttered, and all three burst into more laughter, and now Mac found himself laughing along with them, not knowing exactly why and not really caring either. When they finally stopped giggling, the large woman put her arm around Mac's shoulders, drew him to her, and said, "Okay, we know who you are, but we should probably introduce ourselves to you. I." She waved her hands with a flourish. "I'm the housekeeper and cook. You may call me Alicia." "Alicia?" asked Mac, not comprehending at all. "Okay, you don't have to call me Alicia. It's just a name I am rather fond of and has particular meaning to me." So she crossed her arms and put one hand under her chin, as if thinking especially hard. "You could call me what Nan does." "What? You don't mean—" Now Meg was surprised and even more confused. "Surely this was not the papa who sent the note? I mean, are you saying papa?" "Yes," she responded and smiled, waiting for him to speak as if he were about to say something, which he was not at all. "And I," interrupted the man, who looked to be in his 30s and stood a little shorter than Mac himself. "I try to keep things fixed up around here. I enjoy working with my hands, although, and as Lester will tell you, I take pleasure in cooking and gardening as much as they do." "You look as if you're from the Middle East, maybe Arab," Mac guessed. "Actually, I'm a stepbrother of the great family. I'm Hebrew, to be exact, from the house of Judah." Then Mike was suddenly startled by his own realization. "Then you are Jesus?" "Yes, and you may call me that if you like. After all, it has become my common name. My mother called me Yeshua, but I have also been known to respond to Joshua or even Jesse." Max stood dumbfounded and mute. What he was looking at and listening to simply would not compute. It was all so impossible. But here he was, or was he really here at all? Suddenly he felt faint. Emotion swept over him as his mind attempted desperately to catch up with all the information. Just as he was about to crumple to his knees, the Asian woman stepped closer and deflected his attention. "And I am Sarayu," she said as she tilted her head in a slight bow and smiled. "Keeper of the gardens among their things." Thus tumbled over themselves as Meg struggled to figure out what to do. Was one of these people God? What if there were hallucinations or angels or God was coming later? That could be embarrassing since there were three of them, Maybe that was a Trinity sort of thing, but two women and a man, and none of them white. Then again, why had he naturally assumed that God would be white? He knew his mind was rambling, so he focused on the one question he must wanted answered. Then Max struggled to ask, "Which one of you is God?" "I am," said all three in unison. Meg looked from one to the next, and even though he couldn't begin to grasp what he was seeing and hearing, he somehow believed them. Chapter 6. Piece of pie. No matter what God's power may be, the first aspect of God is never that of the absolute master, the Almighty. It is that of the God who puts himself on our human level and limits himself. Discuss Alu, Anarchy, and Christianity. Well, Mackenzie, don't just stand there gawking with your mouth open like your pants are full, said the big black woman as she turned and headed across the deck, talking the whole time. "Come and talk to me while I get supper on. Or if you don't want to do that, you can do whatever you want behind the cabin," she said, gesturing over the roof without looking or slowing down. "You will find a fishing pole by the boat shed that you can use to catch some lake trout." She stopped it at the door to give Jesus a kiss. "Just remember," she said, turning to look back at Mac, "you gotta clean what you catch." Then, with a quick smile, she disappeared into the cabin, armed with Mac's winter coat and still carrying the gun by two fingers, a full arm's length away from her. Mac was standing there with his mouth indeed open and an expression of bewilderment plastered to his face. He hardly noticed when Jesus walked over and put an arm around his shoulder. Sarah seemed to have just evaporated. "Isn't she great?" exclaimed Jesus, grinning at Mac. Mac turned and faced him, shaking his head. "Am I going crazy? Am I supposed to believe that God is a big black woman with a questionable sense of humor?" Jesus laughed. "She's a riot. You can always count on her to throw you a curve or two. She loves surprises, and even though you might not think it, her timing is always perfect." "Really?" said Mac, still shaking his head and not sure if he really believed that. "So now what am I supposed to do?" "You're not supposed to do anything. You're free to do whatever you like." Jesus paused and then continued, trying to help by giving Meg a few suggestions. "I'm working on a wood project in the shed. Sarayu is in the garden. Or you could go fishing, canoeing, or go in and talk to Papa." "Well, I sort of feel obligated to go in and talk to him up her." "Oh, now Jesus was serious. Don't go because you feel obligated. That won't get you any points around here. Go because it's what you want to do." Mac thought for a moment and decided that going into the cabin actually was what he wanted to do. He thanked Jesus, whose smile turned, and headed up to his workshop. And Mac stepped across the deck and up to the door. Again he was alone, but after a quick look around, he carefully opened up it. He stuck his head in, hesitated, and then decided to take the plunge. God, he called, rather timidly and feeling more than a little foolish. I'm in the kitchen, Mackenzie. Just follow my voice. He walked in and scanned the room. Could this even be the same place? He shuddered at the whisper of lurking dark dots and again looked them out. Across the little hallway disappeared at an angle, glancing around the corner into the living room. His eyes searched out the spot near the fireplace, but there was no stain bearing the wood surface. He noticed that the room was decorated tastefully with art that looked as if it had been either drawn or handcrafted by children. He wondered if this woman treasured each of these pieces, and any parent who loves her children would. Maybe that was how she evolved. Anything that was given to her from the heart, the way children seem to give so easily. Meg followed herself humming down a short hallway and into an open kitchen dining area, complete with a small four-seat table and a wicker baked chair. The inside of the cabin was roomier than he had expected. Papa was working on something with her back to him, flower flying as she swayed to the music of whatever she was listening to. The song obviously came to an end, marked by a couple of last shoulder and hip shakes. Turning to face him, she took off the earphones. Suddenly Meg wanted to ask 1,000 questions, or say 1,000 things, some of them unspeakably and terrible. He was sure that his face betrayed the emotions he was battling to control, and then in a flash of a second, he shoved everything back into his battered horse closet, locking the door on the way out. If she knew his inner conflict, she showed nothing by her expression, still open, full of life, and inviting. He inquired, "May I ask you what you're listening to? You really want to know?" "Sure," now Meg was curious. "West Coast Jazz," group called Diatribe, and an album that isn't even out yet called Heart Trips, actually, she said, winking at Meg. "These kids haven't even been born yet." "Right," Meg responded, more than a little incredulous. "West Coast just, It doesn't sound very religious." "Oh, trust me, it's not. More like Eurasian funk and blues with a message and a great beat." She sidestepped blues with a message and a great beat. She sidestepped toward Meg as if she were doing a dance move and clapped. Meg stepped back. "So God listened to funk?" Meg had never heard funk talked about in any properly righteous term. "I thought you'd be listening to George Beverly or the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, something churchier." Now see here, Mackenzie, you don't have to be looking out for me. I listen to everything and not just to the music itself, but the hearts behind it. Don't you remember your seminary classes? Those kids ain't saying anything I haven't heard before. They're just full of anger and fees. Lots of anger and, I must say, with some good reason too. They're just some of my kids, showing and spouting up. I'm especially fond of those boys, you know. Yep, I'll be keeping my eye on. Meg struggled to keep up with her to make some sense of what was happening. None of his old seminary training was having in the least. He was at a sudden rush for words, and his million questions had all seemed to abandon him. So he stated the obvious. You must know, he offered. Calling you Papa is a bit of a stretch for me. Oh, really? She looked at him in mock surprise. Of course I know, I always know. She chuckled. But tell me, why do you think it's hard for you? Is it because it's too familiar for you, or maybe because I'm enjoying myself as a woman, a mother, or... No smart issue there, Meg interrupted with an awkward chuckle. Or maybe it's because of the failures of your own papa. Meg gasped involuntarily. He wasn't used to having the secret surface so quickly and openly. Instantly guilt and anger welled up, and he wanted to lash out with a sarcastic remark in response. Mac felt as if he were dangling over a bottomless chance, and was afraid if he let any of it out, he would lose control of everything. He sought for safe footing, but was only partially successful, finally answering during great tests. Maybe it's because I've never known anyone I could really call Papa. At that, she put down the mixing bowls that had been cradled in her arms, and leaving the wooden spoon in it, she turned toward Meg with tender eyes. She didn't have to say it. He knew she understood what was going on inside him, and somehow he knew she cared about him more than anyone ever had. If you let me, Mac, I'll be the papa you never had. The offer was at once inviting and at the same time repulsive. He had always wanted a papa he could trust, but he wasn't sure he'd find it here, especially if this one couldn't even protest his Missy. A long silence hung between them. Meg was uncertain what to say, and she was in a hurry to let the moment pass easily. If you couldn't take care of Missy, how can I trust you to take care of me? There he had said. The question that had tormented him every day of the great sadness. Mac felt his face flush angry red as he started at what he now considered to be some odd characterization of God, and he realized his hands were knotted into fists. Meg, I'm so sorry. Tears began to trail down her cheeks. I know what a great gulf this has put between us. I know you don't understand this yet, but I am especially fond of Missy, and you too. He loved the way she said Mrs. name, and yet he hated hearing it coming from her. It rolled up her tongue like the sweetest wine, and even though all the furry still raging, in his mind he somehow knew she meant it. He wanted to believe her, and slowly some of his rage began to subside. That's why you're here, Meg, she continued. I want to heal the wound that has grown inside you and between us. To gain some control, he turned his eyes toward the floor. It was a full minute before he had enough to whisper, without looking up, I think I'd like that. He admitted, but I don't see how. Honey, there's no easy answer that will take your pain again. Believe me, if I had one, I'd use it now. I have no magic wand to wave over you and make it all better. Life takes a bit of time and a lot of relationship. Meg was glad they were stepping back from the edge of his ugly accusation. How near he had come to being totally overwhelmed by it had scared him. I think it'd be easier to have this conversation if you were wearing a dress, he suggested, and attempted a smile as weak as it was. If it were easier, then I wouldn't be, she said with a slight giggle. I'm not trying to make this harder for either of us, but this is a good place to start. I often find that getting head issues out of the way first makes the hard stuff easier to work on later when you're ready. She again picked up the wooden spoon, which was dripping with some sort of batter. Mackenzie, I am neither male nor female. Even though both genders are derived from my nature. If I choose to appear to you as a man or a woman, it's because I love you. For me to appear to you as a woman and suggest that you call me Papa is simply to mix metaphors to help you keep from falling so easily back into your religious conditioning. She leaned forward as if to share a secret, to reveal myself to you as a very large white grandfather figure with flowing beard like Gandalf, but simply reinforced your religious stereotypes. And this weekend is not about reinforcing your religious stereotypes. Mac almost leapt out loud and wanted to say, you think I'm over here barely believing that I am not stark raving mad. Instead, he focused on what she had just said and regained his composure. He believed in his head unless lack of a spirit, neither male nor female, but in spite of that, he was embarrassed to admit to himself that all his vision for God were very white and very male. She stopped talking, but only long enough to put some seasonings in a spice rack on a ledge by the window before turning to face him again. She looked back intently. Hasn't it always been a problem for you to embrace me as your father? And after what you've been through, you couldn't very well handle a father right now, could you? He knew she was right, and he realized the kindness and compassion in what she was doing. Somehow, The way she had approached him had skirted his resistance to her love. It was strange and painful and maybe even a little bit wonderful. But then he paused, still focused on staying rational. Why is there such an emphasis on you being a father? I mean, that seems to be the way you must reveal yourself. Well, responded Papa, turning away from him and bustling around the kitchen. There are many reasons for that, and some of them go very deep. Let me say for now that we knew once the creation was broken through fathering would be much more lacking than mothering. Don't misunderstand me, both are needed. But an emphasis on fathering is necessary because of the enormity of its absence. Mike turned away a bit bewildered and feeling he was already in over his head. As he reflected, he looked through the window at a wild-looking garden. You knew I would come, did you? Didn't you? Meg finally spoke quietly. Of course I did. She was busy again, her back to him. Then was I free not to come? Did I have did I not have a choice in the matter? Papa turned back to face him now with flower and dove in her hands. Good question. How deep would you like to go? She didn't wait for a response, knowing that Meg didn't have one. Instead, she asked, do you believe you are free to live? I suppose I am I? Of course you are. I'm not interested in prisoners. You're free to walk out that door right now and go home to your empty house. Or you could go down to the grind and hang out on what, really? Just because I know you're too curious to go, those, those that reduce your freedom to live? She paused only briefly and then turned back to her task, talking to him over her shoulder. Or if you want to go just a wee bit deeper, we could talk about the nature of freedom itself. Does freedom mean that you are allowed to do whatever you want to do? Or we could talk about are the limiting influences in your life that actively work against your freedom. Your family genetic heritage, your specific DNA, your metabolic uniqueness, the quantum stuff that is going on at a subatomic level, where only I am the always present observer, or the intrusion of your soul sickness that inhibits and binds you, or the social influences around you, or the habits that have created synaptic bonds and pathway in your brain. And then there's advertising, propaganda, and paradigms inside that confluence of multi-faced vested inhibitors, she said, sighing. What is freedom really? Mac just stood there not knowing what to say. Only I can set you free, Mackenzie, but freedom can never be forced. I don't understand, replied Mac. I don't even understand what you just told me. She turned back and smiled. I know I didn't tell you so that you would understand right now. I told you for later. At this point, you don't even comprehend that freedom is an incremental process. Gently reaching out, she took Meg's hand in hers, floor covered and all, and looking him straight in the eyes, she continued, Mackenzie, the truth shall set you free, and the truth has a name. He's over in the wood shop right now, covered in sawdust. Everything is about him, and freedom is a process that happens inside the relationship with him. Then all that stuff you free churning around inside will start to work its way out. How can you really know how I feel? Meg asked, looking back into her eyes. Papa didn't answer, only looked down at their hands. His gaze followed hers, and for the first time, Meg noticed the scars on her wrist, like those he now assumed Jesus also had on his. She allowed him to tenderly touch the scars, outlines of a deep piercing, and he finally looked up again into her eyes. Tears were slowly making their way down her face, little pathway through the floor that dusted her cheeks. Don't ever think that what my son chose to do didn't cost us dearly. Love always leaves a significant mark, she stated softly and gently. We were there together. Meg was surprised at the truth. No, wait, I thought you left him. No, my God, why has this forsaken me? It was a scripture that had often haunted Meg in the great sadness. You misunderstand the Mr. Dare. Regardless of what he felt at that moment, I never left him. How can you say that? You abandoned him just like you abandoned me. Mackenzie, I never left him, and I have never left you. That makes no sense to me, he snapped.